She looked up from her magazine. "You know, I've been thinking we might want to knock down the wall between the living room and the dining room," she said. "Have more of an open concept." "An open wallet's more like it," Jack said. "My wallet." He stomped over to the refrigerator, new, stainless steel, and very expensive, and looked inside. What was the good of having a top-of-the-line refrigerator if there wasn't anything worth eating inside it? "We never have anything good to eat in this house," Jack said. Becky rolled her eyes. "I had a fruit smoothie for dinner. I'd be happy to make you one too." "That's not food," Jack growled. "Food is something you can chew." Becky got up from her table and started selecting fruit from the fruit bowl. "Hun, I know you'd love to eat a big juicy steak every night, but the doctor says it's bad for your cholesterol and blood pressure. A fruit smoothie with protein powder is much healthier, and besides, it wouldn't hurt you to go down a pant size." Jack's head was pounding with both hunger and anger. "Nothing is ever good enough for you, is it? Everything always has to be improved. The house, your wardrobe, my waistline, everything always has to be upgraded again and again." Becky was dropping blueberries into the blender. "Well, in the case of your waistline, it would be more of a downgrade that's needed." She smiled at him. It was the same smile he used to find radiant, but paired with tonight's criticism, it was just annoying. "That's not funny," Jack said. "Stop making the smoothie. I don't want a smoothie. I'm going out for a hamburger." "But your cholesterol." "If I die from cholesterol, at least I'll die full and happy," Jack said. He stormed out of the house, then realized he'd forgotten his shoes and had to tiptoe back in to get them. It wasn't the dramatic exit he'd been hoping for. Jack pulled up to the drive-thru at the Golden Heifer. "Thank you for choosing the Golden Heifer. Order when you're ready," the voice on the speaker said. "Give me the Moo Inc. double bacon cheeseburger, a large fry, and a peanut butter shake," Jack said. "That'll be $9.25. Please pull up to the window," the voice said. Jack shoved a 10 at the young cashier in the window and grabbed his order. He pulled into an empty parking space to eat his meal. When he unwrapped his burger, there was no bacon on it. Enraged, he got out of the car and stomped up to the drive-thru window, holding the burger in his hands as evidence. The cashier, a petite young woman with mousy brown hair, said, "I'm sorry, sir, but the drive-thru is for cars only. If you need to speak to someone, you need to go inside the restaurant." "I ordered the Moo Inc. double bacon cheeseburger, and you left out the oink," Jack yelled. "I am not going inside the restaurant. I am standing here until you make my order right. I demand bacon." The cashier, who was probably still in high school, looked nervous. "Our company policy is no customer on foot at the drive-thru." "I don't give a plug nickel for what your company is. I'm standing here until I get what I paid good money for." "So," the cashier said with a quiver in her voice, "there was no bacon on your burger?" "That's what I said," Jack thundered. "Do you not speak English, or are you just an idiot?" "I'm sorry you're frustrated, sir," the cashier said. "I'm going to fix the problem for you, but you have to understand, I'm new at this job. Today's my first day. And if you work for me, it would be your last," Jack said. The young woman looked like she was near tears, which Jack found strangely satisfying. Once his order was finally corrected, Jack stomped back to his car and gobbled down the food like a starving dog. A smoothie was not dinner. He was a man, and men need to eat. He knew he was consuming thousands of calories, but once the food was all gone, he still felt empty. He reached into the glove compartment and pulled out the bank statement that had come earlier in the day. Jack had a master's degree in business and was an expert number cruncher, but no matter how much he crunched them, these numbers were bad. It shouldn't be this way. Many years ago, when he was in college, Jack had envisioned himself on Wall Street as a real mover and shaker in the world of finance. When that hadn't panned out, he had gone up job at a bank and started to move his way up the ranks. He worked there several years, and his career had been on the rise, until he butted heads with his superiors and yelled at his subordinates one too many times and got himself fired. "You're great with numbers, Jack," his old boss had said, "but you're terrible with people. Hard to get along with," they had said. "Authoritarian personality," they had said. Jack had figured that if he built his own business, he wouldn't have to be bossed around by anybody. When the pizza restaurant building had gone up for sale, he took the plunge. He knew that kind of restaurant had been a big hit in other cities, so he figured he couldn't fail. He was wrong. He frowned at the numbers on the bank statement. He didn't have to be an expert number cruncher to see that he owed more than he was earning. In Jack's pocket, his phone, the latest model which Becky had bought for him and for his birthday with his money, rang. "Hi, Dad." It was Tyson, his son, calling from college. Jack felt his dark mood lift a bit as he thought back to Tyson's childhood, the ball games, and the birthday parties. Things had been happier then. "Hey, buddy, what's up?" Well, I just wanted to let you know that I had to use your credit card for a couple of things today." Tyson's voice sounded tense. "One of my classes had an additional textbook I didn't know I needed, and then—" Tyson paused. That pause made Jack nervous. "And then?" Jack prompted. "I had a little oopsie with the card that ended up costing $900. I'm sorry, Dad." $900 is a big oopsie. A gigantic oopsie, in fact. Jack felt his face heat up with anger. "I know, Dad. I really am sorry. It was an emergency. Sorry doesn't get me $900 back. Plus, whatever exorbitant sum you had to spend for that useless textbook. His voice was growling louder and louder. "Tyson, you're supposed to be off at school, learning how to be independent, learning how to be a man. Well, how are you going to be an independent young man if you just reach for Daddy's credit card every time you have a supposed emergency?" I thought that's what you gave it to me for. Emergencies," Tyson said. His voice had the trembling quality it got when he was upset. "Are you talking back to me?" Jack roared. "No, Dad. I'm just trying to understand." "Well, I'm trying to understand too," Jack interrupted him. "I'm trying to understand how just two people, the other one being your mother, though you don't need a college education to figure that one out, how just two people can be such an enormous drain on my finances." Jack hung up the phone before he could hear whatever sob story Tyson was about to tell him. Bleeding him dry. His business. His family were bleeding him dry. Why couldn't they understand that he wasn't an endless source of money? They treated him like a human ATM. With a shaking hand, Jack opened the search engine screen on his phone and typed in the word bankruptcy. From the Puppet Carver by Sage Brantley. "What are they?" Sylvester asked the little girl. In the cardboard box was a pile of small, squirming, furry creatures. The little girl giggled. "They're kittens! Have you ever seen kittens before?" "And have you never seen kittens before?" Sylvester shook his head. "Really?" the little girl said. She picked up one of the creatures. It was orange and white, and made a strange mewing sound. "They're baby cats. I named this one Daffodil. Do you want to pet her?" Sylvester reached out and gently stroked the tiny creature. "Isn't she soft?" the little girl said. "Yes, very soft," Sylvester answered. But the truth was, the kitten could have been as hard as a rock for all he knew. He could feel nothing. Sylvester, like all of his wooden brethren, had been created perfectly to perform the manufacturing jobs that were required of them. But because he and his brethren could not truly feel anything, they were not real. Sylvester couldn't feel the softness of a kitten, or the bright sun on his face. He couldn't feel the heat from a fireplace, or a cool evening breeze. He couldn't feel the hugs of friendship, or the kisses of love. Sylvester could walk and talk like a man, but he wasn't fooling anybody, least of all himself. A wooden man was no man at all. More than anything, Sylvester longed to be real. Today was the day. Porter had arrived at work early to set up the puppet carver on the stage. He had even gone to the office supply store and gotten a flip chart so he could explain how the machine worked in an official-looking way. He wanted everything to be as professional as possible. It had to be, if he was going to save the restaurant and everybody's jobs. Sage helped him center the puppet carver on the stage. "You've really gone all out, haven't you?" Sage said, looking at the flip chart, then at the uncharacteristic jacket and tie Porter was wearing. "Yep," Porter said. "I'm a nervous wreck, too. I really need this to go well. I feel like we all need it." "Yeah, but no pressure, right?" Sage said. "Even though our futures are all in your hands." "Yeah, no pressure. That's totally no pressure." Angie came in for her shift and looked up at the stage. "Hey, looking snazzy," she said to Porter. "Just trying to make a good impression," Porter said. He tugged at the uncomfortable tie. He had always thought it was strange that hanging a strip of cloth from your neck was supposed to make you seem all businesslike and professional. Who decided that anyway? Angie flashed him a thumbs up. Well, I, for one, am impressed. Wait till you see the machine work, Porter said. Then you'll be impressed. Jack stomped into the dining area, his face already set in a scowl. Clearly he was in a terrible mood, but what else was new? Oh, that's right, Jack said, looking up at Porter, who was on stage with his invention. Today's the day you're going to waste my time with that contraption you made. Sir, with all due respect, I don't think you'll find it a waste of time, Sage said. When Porter showed it to me, I thought it was amazing. Yeah, well, you're the one who's always working on that novel, Jack said, using exaggerated finger quotes. Show me a fiction writer, and I'll show you a liar. Sage opened his mouth, but before he could put his foot in it, Porter jumped in. Why don't we go ahead and get to the demonstration? Sage, can you get Edwin out of the kitchen? He wanted to see this too. Porter hoped having a small errand to run would distract Sage from the fact that Jack had just insulted him. Soon, Edwin, Angie, and Sage were sitting at the table nearest the stage, smiling and cheering Porter on. Jack sat at a table in the rear and leaned back with his arms crossed over his chest. Okay, he said. Impress me. Yes, sir, Porter said. He tried to sound confident, even though he was nervous. Sage, can you give me a hand with this log? Sage stepped up and helped him feed the large piece of wood into the machine's opening. I've got it from here. Thanks, buddy, Porter said, and Sage took his place back at the table. Now, I just push this button, and we watch the magic, Porter said. After he pushed the button, he stepped aside so everybody could have a clear view of the machine. Porter could tell right away that something was wrong. The machine was shaking too much and making a strange sputtering sound. There was an unfamiliar rattle from deep within its core. Porter caught Sage's eye, and could tell that Sage knew, too. Porter knew that he had correctly secured the log inside the compartment, but when he opened the door, the machine splat splinters and sawdust so forcefully that it sprayed from the stage into the dining area. Sage and Edwin and Angie were pelted with the stuff. Angie screamed and shielded her face. Edwin started sneezing. Sage ran up on the stage. Maybe you should turn it off, man, he said. Porter realized he had been frozen in horror. He quickly touched the button, and the machine sputtered to a stop. He looked at the pile of shavings and sawdust in the compartment, and then, fearfully, he looked at Jack. Jack's face was a mask of rage. His lips were pressed together in a tight line. Porter knew that when those lips parted, whatever came out of them was going to be bad. It was. What came out first was not even words, but the roar of a lion furious to discover it has been caged. He pounded the table with his fists. Finally, the words came out. You absolute idiot! Is this some kind of sick joke? No, sir, Porter said. He was shaking and sweating profusely. Something must have malfunctioned this time. It was working great before. You can ask Sage... Sage the liar? Jack asked, his words dripping venom. No matter how terrified he was, Porter wasn't going to let Jack talk about his best friend like that. Sir, Sage isn't... Don't argue with me, Jack yelled. You all seem to have forgotten who's in charge here. He stood up from the table. He looked at Porter, then at Angie, Sage, and Edwin in turn. The look on his face was one of sheer disgust. I can't imagine there is a business owner in the world with a sorrier group of employees. Lazy, incompetent. He looked at the machine and the mess of shavings and sawdust. Destructive. No wonder this business is in the toilet. I'll go down with my ship like a good captain should, but I know who's to blame for it. The crew. I've got half a mind to fire you all here and now, but we open in 30 minutes, and look at this place. Clean it up, people! He stomped back to his office and slammed the door. Jack sure was mixing his metaphors there, Sage said. I'm confused. Are we on a ship or in a toilet? Angie shook her head. I don't know how you can joke at a time like this. We're all going to get fired. Oh, I don't think he'll fire us, Edwin said. He won't want to hire or train new people, not with the business going under. We'll just lose our jobs when the restaurant closes. Is that supposed to be good news? Angie asked. Porter sat down with his friends at the table. They were the saddest-looking bunch he had ever seen, and he couldn't help but feel it was all his fault. I'm sorry, Porter said. I don't know what happened, but I do know I let you all down. It's okay, Sage said. All inventors learn trial and error. Today was the error part. There will be better days. Sage rose to his feet. Let me go get some supplies to clean this up. Together they swept the stage and wiped down the sawdust-covered tables. They used the giant wet-dry vac to suck up all the shavings off the carpet. Porter and Sage carried the failed machine back to its place in the storage room. Porter was desperate to look inside it and troubleshoot, but he knew that if he hoped to end his night still employed, he needed to focus on the one thing, following Jack's orders to the letter, no matter how demanding or ridiculous they were. He and Porter returned to the stage and mopped up the dusty residue. By the opening time, all evidence of the disaster was gone. Jack emerged from his office and surveyed the dining area. See, Porter said. Spotless. You can't even tell what happened. It'll do, Jack said. He took 2 steps closer to Porter so he was standing right in his face. That dangerous piece of equipment you're responsible for could have destroyed my whole restaurant. He pointed his index finger at Porter. You're fired. The rest of you too. Get out. Now! So you make us clean up like we're going to be opening, and then you fire us? Sage said, confused and hurt. Jack grinned through his rage. You see, unlike you all, I'm not a fool. I knew if I fired you, then asked you to clean up, the place would still be dirty. From the Puppet Carver, by Sage Brantley. Sylvester knew that he could feel now, because he felt pain beyond imagining. After he paid the fixer in money and promises he didn't look forward to keeping, the fixer had connected Sylvester to the machinery, and pain had shot through his body with the force of electricity as every new nerve, muscle, bone, and tendon in his body were shocked to life. The pain was so strong, he seemed to be able to see it, even hear it, as its intensity drowned out the sounds of his own screams. But since Sylvester had paid the price in pain, now he could feel pleasure too. As he walked the city streets, he could feel fresh air in his new lungs. He crossed the street, went into the park, and touched the bark of a tree. Hard, rough. He stopped at an ice cream truck and bought a cone just so he could touch his lips to its coldness. A lady walked by with a fluffy white dog on a leash. Excuse me, could I please pet your dog? Sylvester asked her. The lady smiled. Sure, Sophia loves everybody. Sylvester knelt down and buried his newly sensate hands in the dog's fluffy coat. Tears sprang to his eyes. Now he knew what soft meant. Thank you, Sylvester said to the dog's owner. The woman looked at him strangely. She said, You're welcome, but quickly walked away. Sylvester looked down at his hands. They felt alive. For the first time since his creation, he felt alive. His hands itched and burned in desperation. All he could think about was what he wanted to touch next. Jack sat alone in his office, looking at the evening's few receipts. The only good thing about his situation was that he'd finally fired his idiot employees, so he could at least wallow in his misery in peace. He knew if he went home, Becky would want to talk to him about whatever new way she had found to spend the money that they didn't have. He knew he should have a talk with Becky about finances, but he couldn't bring himself to do it yet. Becky had married him in part because he was a good catch, with a promising future. How could he tell her he hadn't made good on that promise? Would she even stay with him if the money ran out? This was a woman who grew up with a mother telling her, It's just as easy to love a rich man as a poor man, and who jokingly suggested that the words for poorer be struck from their wedding vows. Tick, tick. What was that noise? Jack didn't know if it had been going on a while without him noticing, or if it had just started. Either way, now that he heard it, he couldn't stop hearing it. Tick, tick. It sounded like an especially loud watch, or a ticking time bomb. Had somebody planted a bomb in the restaurant? If they had, it was a blessing. Jack tried to turn his attention back to his bookkeeping, but the noise was too distracting. Tick, tick. It was more than distracting. It was maddening. What was that Edgar Allan Poe story Jack had read in high school, where the guy kills the old man and then is driven crazy by the nonstop beating sound of the old man's heart? It was like that. Tick, tick. The The sound seemed to be coming from behind the stage. Maybe it had something to do with one of the animatronics? Well, there was no way to get any work done with this sound rattling around in his brain. He might as well try to find the source and see if he could stop it. Tick, tick! The sound was louder when he was on the stage, so he was definitely getting warmer. He went backstage to the storage room. Tick, tick! Dusty curtain. Back of the room, behind an old dusty curtain, one of his idiot employees had hung up for some reason. He pulled back the curtain. Tick, tick! The sound was much louder now, unbearably loud. Jack clamped his hands over his ears. He looked at the disabled animatronics lined up like figures in a wax museum. They weren't where the noise was coming from. Tick, tick! It was coming from the contraption, the horrible mechanical abomination that fool Porter had made. The ticking sound, clearly coming from deep inside the machine's bowels, was making it shake so hard it seemed in danger of falling over. Jack pushed the button on the outside, but nothing happened. He opened the door, and the sound grew so loud he was sure it could be heard from outside the building. Tick, 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 tick! There was some type of control panel inside the machine. Maybe if he just stepped in for a moment, he could find the right button to make the horrible ticking stop. He stepped inside. It was a tight space. Jack hated tight spaces. The door slid shut with a click. He reached out to open it, but there was no handle on the inside. He thought of banging on the door and yelling, but there was no one there to hear him. And even if there was no way he could be heard over the horrible ticking, which was now so loud it felt like it was coming from inside his own skull. But then the ticking sound was drowned out by the whirring of machinery. The contraption appeared to have turned on. He looked at the walls of the machine. They were lined up with circular blades that had started to spin and were now extending from the walls toward his body. What was it that idiot had called the machine? The puppet carver? Jack's heart pounded in terror. He was going to be carved. There was no one to escape. All around him, the sharp metal blades reached toward his body, less than an inch from making contact with his arms, his legs, his face. This was it. He was going to die, and painfully. How long would it take, he wondered, for someone to find his body? No one would think to look for him here, not until there was a smell. Jack shut his eyes and prepared for the worst. Bang! He gasped, startled by the deafening noise. The loud bang was followed by a cloud of black smoke that filled the small space where Jack was trapped. There was a smell of ozone. He coughed and wondered if he would asphyxiate before the blades in the machine had time to shred him. Wait! The blades! The blades had stopped spinning. The machine was quiet. It must have malfunctioned in some way. The door slid open, releasing the smoke from the compartment. The machine made a sad sputtering noise, and then was still. Jack was alive! He couldn't believe it. He stepped out of the compartment like he was stepping into a new, better world. He looked himself over. No harm done. Not to him, anyway. The puppet carver might be broken beyond repair, but it hadn't really worked right in the first place. Jack felt himself smiling. When was the last time he had smiled genuinely? He couldn't even remember, but now, back from the cliff's edge of death, there seemed to be so many reasons to smile. The problems that had consumed him before didn't seem as important. Money didn't matter that much. All that mattered was that he was alive. Jack walked out of the building. He looked up at the night sky. The stars sparkled, and the moon blanketed the world in a silver glow. It was so beautiful that tears sprang to his eyes. When was the last time he had really seen the moon and the stars? When was the last time he cried? Looking back at the last decade of his life, the only feelings he could remember were anger and fear. Anger at his employees, at his wife, at his son. Fear of losing money, power, status. What kind of life was that? Well, that stopped now. It was a new day. Well, a new night anyway. He was going to be nicer to his wife, to his son, to his employees, to the random people he transacted with in day-to-day life. Jack felt his heart brimming with love and kindness. He was like Ebenezer Scrooge in A Christmas Carol after his encounter with the ghosts, no longer a mean old miser, but a man who could find the goodness in life and people, and even within himself. Jack got in his car. How fortunate he was to have such a nice car. How fortunate he was to have a car at all! Many people were not so lucky. He started the car and headed toward home. He hoped Becky was still awake. He had a lot to say to her. "Oh," he said as he drove by the Golden Heifer. He turned back to the restaurant and pulled into the drive-thru line. When it was his turn, the voice on the intercom said, "Thank you for choosing Golden Heifer. Please order when you're ready." "Actually, I have a question to ask you," Jack said. "Yes," the voice said. "Are you the young lady who was working the drive-thru Tuesday night?" he asked. Yes, sir." She sounded uncomfortable. "Good. I've got something I need to say to you. I'll just pull up to the window, okay?" Would you like to speak to the manager?" "No, my beef is with you," Jack laughed. "Get it? Beef? Because you sell hamburgers?" He couldn't tell if the drive-thru worker thought this was funny or not. When he pulled up to the window, the young woman said, "Oh, you." "Yes, me," Jack said, "but I'm a very different me than I was last night. I want to apologize for my behavior. You were learning a new job, and you were doing your best and being very polite, and I was rude. I'm sorry." "Thank you," the young woman said, but her inflection rose as if she were asking a question. Clearly, she was finding this encounter puzzling. "Thank you," Jack said, "for your politeness and understanding." He sat there and smiled at her. "You're welcome." The young woman looked at the line of cars growing behind Jack's vehicle. "Did you want to order anything, sir?" she asked. "No, I'm good." He found himself chuckling. "I'm really, really good. You have a nice night now." "You too." Jack drove away, feeling the weight of one of his regrets lifting. But fixing one isolated incident, like a drive-thru dust-up, was easy. With Becky, with Tyson, there were years of bad behavior on his part, way more than he could fix with a simple, "I'm sorry." An idea popped into Jack's head. Donuts. Donuts would be a start. Back when he and Becky had been young and broke, they used to meet for dates at the Donkey Dough-Man, an all-night donut place near the coffee shop where Becky had been working at that time. Despite its stupid name, the Donkey Dough-Man was the perfect place for a cheap date. The two of them would scrape up enough money for a donut each, chocolate frosted for Becky, and maple frosted for Jack, and 2 cups of coffee. The manager didn't mind that they only spent $5 and took up a booth for hours, talking and drinking cup after cup of coffee. Or if he did, he never said anything. That was back when he and Becky really talked to each other, before the money, before parenthood, before all the stresses of responsible adult life. They talked earnestly about their dreams, their goals, their future. If Jack brought home donuts from the Donkey Dough-Man, maybe it would remind her of those conversations. Maybe it would be the first step toward getting them to talking again. There was no street parking near the donut shop, so Jack had to use the parking garage a block away. He wasn't thrilled by this fact, really. The Donkey Dough-Man wasn't in the safest neighborhood to be wandering at night, but he had become increasingly convinced that showing up with a bag of donuts might be the path back to Becky's heart. It was a thoughtful gesture, and it had been a long time since he'd been thoughtful. Jack didn't like parking garages. There was something eerie about the flickering fluorescent lighting and the way sounds echoed. The elevators always seemed to be on the verge of breaking, and were infested by foul and mysterious odors. Jack breathed a sigh of relief when the elevator doors opened. He hustled toward the garage's exit. At first, he heard only the sound of his own shuffling footsteps, but then he was sure he heard another pair of footsteps behind him. He casually glanced over his shoulder. There was no need to be afraid. It was probably just some regular person on a regular errand like he was. But Jack saw no one. He chalked it up to the weird echo effect of the parking garage and walked through the exit onto the street. He walked past a dry cleaner's and an insurance office. Most of the businesses on the street were dark and locked up for the night, but in the distance he could see the lights of the Donkey Dough-Man sign with its smiling donut mascot. He heard the footsteps behind him again. He turned around, but only saw a flash of movement as whoever it was ducked into an alley. Jack was pretty sure he was being paranoid. After his near-death experience earlier in the day, it made sense that his nerves were on edge. He heard the steps again. They sounded wet, squishy, like somebody walking in galoshes in the rain. Jack started walking more quickly, and the steps sped up to match his. He was tempted to turn around and confront the person, but what good would that do if the person were armed? He broke into a run, though he knew he was too out of shape to run for long. The squishy steps behind him ran too. Suddenly, the donut shop seemed too far away to be a safe destination. He had to go inside, somewhere, to find a place with people and lights, a place where his pursuer would not follow him. He caught sight of an office building on the left, tried the door, and found it open. Once inside, he noticed that the door had a chain, which he quickly fastened. There was also a lock on the doorknob, which he turned. Feeling a little safer, he took a deep breath and turned around to survey the space where he found himself. There were no people, and the only light was from a single bare bulb overhead. The building looked abandoned. Graffiti had been spray-painted all over the walls. The glass in the windows had been smashed, and the doors that had once led to offices had been torn off their hinges. He glanced inside one room to see a desk and a broken office chair and piles of garbage, probably from people who had been squatting in the place. Squatters. There was something else to fear, but the building was as silent as a mausoleum, and he seriously doubted that the potential mugger who had been following him would go to the trouble of trying to unlock the building's front door. For the first time being, he was safe. He glanced back at the front door, just to confirm that he'd locked it, and saw there was movement in the tiny crack between the bottom of the door and the floor. Something was oozing through the crack. It was some sort of gelatinous substance, and its movement was slow and steady. It was pink, but it was a horrible pink, not the pink of cake frosting and party balloons. It was the pink of some living creature's insides. Jack took a step backward. He knew he needed to move more quickly, but he was transfixed by the sight of whatever was in front of him. Although it had the appearance of some sort of goo, it seemed to be moving under its own power. It wasn't an inanimate substance. It was alive. The sudden realization shook Jack out of his trance, and he ran down the hallway. He heard the squishy, sloppy steps behind him again, but he didn't turn around to look. He just kept running. At the end of the hall was a door marked Exit. He pushed on the door, but it wouldn't budge. Was it locked from the outside? Broken? He turned around. The thing, whatever it was getting closer. It was a pile of parts he couldn't make sense of. Much of it was somewhere between solid and liquid, but there were fully solid parts as well. Bundles of long, snake-like tubes, veiny bags, and pouches. When Jack was a little boy, he spent winter break at his grandparents' farm. He remembered watching his grandpa and uncle butcher a hog once. They hung its body from a tree. His uncle had sliced the hog's middle, and its guts had spilled out into a bucket with a sickening splat. This thing, that was how it sounded when it moved. Since he had no luck with the exit, Jack tried another nearby door. It was unlocked. He quickly opened it, darted in, and slammed and locked the door behind him. He was inside another ruined office. The floor was strewn with garbage, and the window was cracked. But strangely, a plaque still hung on the wall saying Employee of the Month, and an empty bookshelf, about the height of Jack's waist, had been knocked onto the floor. Jack dragged it to the door and shoved it under the doorknob at an angle. Winded, Jack sat down in the chair behind the desk. Here he was, looking like the boss he had been for years, but in a ruined office, hiding in fear for his life. He should have known the locked door was useless. Long, slimy tendrils were already snaking their way through the cracks underneath it. Pink slime dripped around the sides of the door and pooled onto the floor, merging itself with the creeping tendrils. Jack looked to the window as a possible escape route, but more of the globby substance was slithering over the windowsill. Jack looked back at the door, where the thing continued to ooze out. Is there more than one thing? Or is it all the same thing? What is happening? There was a loud slurping sound, like someone trying to pull their feet out of deep mud. Rapidly, so fast he couldn't even make sense of it, the mass of slime and solids reconstituted itself into an upright being that sat in the chair across the desk from Jack. The thing had approximations of arms and legs, and a lumpy mound that stood in for a head. It was made of the translucent pink goo, under which its organs were visible. Somehow it reminded Jack of the awful gelatin salad his mom used to make, with canned fruit suspended under the slimy surface. It had no mouth or nose, but it had eyes. Dark eyes that stared at Jack as though the thing could see into him the way he could see into it. What do you want? Jack asked, his voice trembling. He didn't want to die, not when he had just one near miss, not when he was just remembering what was important. The creature kept looking at him. Then slowly, it raised one arm and reached toward him. Like elastic, its arm stretched, growing thinner as it reached across the length of the desk to touch Jack's face. Pain like Jack had never known shot through him, but it wasn't physical pain. He felt the pain of hurt, neglect, abuse. It was the pain of every employee he ever yelled at or fired. The pain of his son every time he missed one of his ball games or unfairly criticized him. The pain of his wife for every forgotten birthday or unkind word. Jack was filled with all the emotional pain he ever caused, and it was more intense than he could ever bear. He doubled over and squeezed his tear-filled eyes shut. Sure, he was about to die from a real broken heart. But then the pain left him, just as suddenly as it had come, and he was awash in an overwhelming sense of relief. When he opened his eyes, the creature was gone. Becky was in bed, but awake, watching one of her shows about home remodeling on TV. "Hiya, Bex," Jack said, pleased to hear his old pet name for her come out of his mouth. He sat down on the bed next to her. "Can I talk to you for a few minutes?" "Sure." She aimed the remote and switched off the TV. "Is everything okay? You're not sick or anything, are you?" Her brow furrowed like it did when she was worried. "No, it's nothing like that." "Good. I mean, it's just been a really long time since you seemed like you wanted to talk to me. So I was afraid it was going to be something bad." "It is bad, but you've done nothing wrong. I wanted to say, I know I've been a bad husband lately, and I'm sorry." Lately didn't begin to cover it. He knew. He couldn't remember the last time he'd acted like a decent husband. Maybe when Tyson was little? Wow. There were tears in her eyes, which she wiped away. "I wasn't expecting that." "Well, from now on, you can expect better of me. You can demand better of me." He felt his eyes getting a little teary too. "Part of the reason I've been so on edge is money. The business isn't doing well, Bex. The animatronics keep breaking. Families aren't showing up. I'm losing all this money on food. I don't know how much longer the pizza playground can limp along." Becky took his hand and held it. It had been a long time since she had done that. "Oh, honey, you should have told me. And here I've been yammering away about remodeling and all this stuff that cost a lot of money. I never would have even suggested it if I'd known you'd been worried about money. From now on, you've got to promise to tell me when something's wrong." Jack nodded. "I will. I promise. And I promise I'll do the same." She looked him in the eyes. "Actually, I think the reason I've obsessed over the house so much is that I've been sad ever since Tyson left home. Fixing things up in the house distracted me from how much I miss him." "I miss him too," Jack said. "Nobody tells you how hard it's going to be when your kid goes off to college." Becky wiped another tear away. "They act like it's one big party, but it's actually not. But it's not. Actually, I've been thinking I might go back to work. There was an opening at my old real estate office, and they called to ask if I was interested. I figured that way I could keep my mind active and see other people during the day." She squeezed his hand. "Plus, if I get a job, we'd have 2 incomes instead of 1. It might ease some of your financial worries." Jack tucked a lock of hair behind her ear. "If that's really what you want to do, then I support you." Back before Tyson was born, Becky had been a successful real estate agent. He had to admit that the thought of someone else in the family earning money was comforting. It's really what I want to do," she smiled. "There's no need to be a stay-at-home mom when there's no kids staying at home anymore. It was either get a job or get a dog to turn into my surrogate child." "I think you made the right choice," Jack said, smiling in return. "Say, do you think Tyson's still up?" "It's not even 11, and he's a college student," Becky said. Of course he's still up. For him, the night is young." She snuggled down under the covers. "But it's past my bedtime." "Mine too," Jack agreed. "But all the same, I want to give Tyson a call." Jack took his phone into the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water. Tyson answered on the first ring, but he sounded low. "Hey, buddy," Jack said. "I just wanted to check in to see how you're doing. I promised I haven't spent any more of your money if that's what you wanted to know." "No, I wasn't calling about money. I was calling about you." "Really?" Tyson's tone had a hard edge. "Because when we talked earlier this week, you wouldn't even let me tell you about the car emergency I had. You were too upset that I charged your credit card $900 to make the repairs." Jack felt a little tug at his heart. Was what Tyson saying true? Could Jack have really been so cold? "I'm sorry if that's how I seemed. You didn't have an accident, did you?" "No, but I could have easily. My car broke a belt on the interstate and just dropped dead. It was a miracle I didn't get hit. All these cars were just whizzing past me, and I was right in the center lane. Finally, a police officer helped me get the car moved to the side of the road and called a tow truck. I was really scared, Dad." His voice broke with emotion. "Anybody would have been scared in that situation, son." Jack felt the full weight of guilt bearing down on him. "I'm just glad you're okay. Did the mechanic get the car fixed okay?" "Yeah, it's running great now." "Good." Jack knew that the mechanic had overcharged Tyson, taking advantage of the fact that Tyson was an experienced boy who didn't know what a fair price was. But the important thing was that Tyson was safe. You couldn't put a price on that. "Listen, buddy, I'm going to let you go," Jack said. "I'm sure you've got way more interesting things to do than to talk to your old man. If you need anything, let me know, okay? I love you, buddy." "I love you too, Dad," Tyson said, sounding confused. As soon as Jack ended the call, he sipped his water and ate one of Becky's delicious homemade oatmeal cranberry pecan cookies. In the morning, he thought, he would make some phone calls. He would tell the kids he'd fired, because that's what they were, just kids, to come back to work as usual. He would make things right with them. Jack climbed the stairs, put on his pajamas, and brushed his teeth. He slid into the cool, clean sheets beside Becky, who was already asleep. As soon as Jack closed his eyes, so was he. It was a deep, peaceful rest. Porter didn't have much of an appetite, but he nibbled his toast and sipped his coffee. He couldn't face the 2 sunny-side-up eggs on his plate, and wasn't sure why he had ordered them, except out of habit. It felt like the eggs were staring at him judgmentally. He knew that what was bothering him was the same thing that was bothering everybody else in their booth in the Golden Heifer, where they were having their traditional late Saturday morning breakfast. They had all received the call from Jack, all agreed to report back to work at the pizza playground, but they were fearful about what might happen when they got there. Angie was toying with her pancakes. "So, on a scale of 1 to 10, how bad a mood do you think Jack will be in today?" "An 11. Definitely 11, Sage said, picking at his fruit plate. "I've got a job interview at the fancy new steakhouse on Monday," Edwin said. "They're still hiring. I'm just saying." "I don't think I'll ever get hired as a server at some fancy place," Angie said. "I'm not ladylike enough, you know." She crammed a whole strip of bacon in her mouth, as if to illustrate her point. "I'm doomed to sling pizzas at preschoolers." "Yeah, I don't guess the fancy steakhouse has animatronics they need somebody to service," Porter threw in. "Yeah," Sage said, laughing. "But wouldn't it be weird if they did? There'd be all these rich adults eating steak and lobster and singing head, shoulders, knees, and toes, along with Baron von Bear and his friends." Edwin smiled at Sage and shook his head. "You are weird, man. But they're hiring cleaning staff for the night shift. You ought to apply. Fancy places need their bathroom cleaned just like regular places." "That's encouraging to hear," Sage said. "You know me, student and novelist by day, toilet scrubber by night." They paid their bill and walked together to the pizza playground with all the enthusiasm of condemned prisoners. When they reached the building, they saw the outside had been decorated with dozens of brightly colored balloons. A sign read, "Special today, large cheese pizza, 4 drinks for $10, includes 25 free game tokens." Porter couldn't imagine Jack ever voluntarily giving away anything for free. "That's actually a pretty good deal," he said. Apparently, other people thought so too. A family of 4 paused and looked at the sign. The dad reached into his wallet and pulled out a $10 bill and said, "Why not?" The family went inside. "Wow," Porter said. "I feel almost hopeful." Sage wasn't as enthused. "Be careful. Remember that Jack has given us plenty of reasons to be pessimistic." Porter had to admit that Sage was right. They entered the dining area. Jack was standing next to the table with the family who had just come in and was chatting with them as he filled their glasses and set their pitcher with the rest of the soda on the table. Porter was shocked to see Jack pleasantly interacting with and actually waiting on customers. "Did you see that?" Angie whispered to Porter and Sage. "Since when does Jack hand out free refills without customers practically begging for them?" "Since now, apparently," Porter said. "And look at his face. What is he doing?" Sage was similarly in shock. "I think he's smiling." Seeing Jack smile was like seeing a dog dancing on its hind legs. It wasn't physically impossible, but it seemed highly unlikely. "There's my stellar staff," Jack said, giving them a friendly wave. "Edwin, would you be willing to go into the kitchen and make these fine folks one of your delicious pizzas?" "Sure," Edwin said, looking at Jack like he had just sprouted an extra head. "Angie, Sage, Porter, how are you guys doing today?" Jack said, grinning at them. "It's getting close to final exams, isn't it? Are you studying hard?" Porter looked over at his equally confused friends. "Yes, sir." "That's good," Jack said. "I'm proud of you." "Thank you, sir." Jack grinned warmly at the trio, taking them aside. "I do hope that all of you will accept my apologies for my behavior yesterday. I also hope you'll accept a $2 an hour raise." He gave Porter a chuck on the shoulder. "And what's with all this sir stuff? There's no need for formality. This is Pizza Playground. We're here to have fun." Porter and Sage shared a look. In the past, Jack had always demanded that his employees call him sir, as if he were their drill sergeant in boot camp. Another family of 4 came in, perhaps also lured by the $10 special. "Welcome, welcome," Jack called, like an enthusiastic game show host. "Who's ready for pizza, games, and a show?" All the kids cheered while their parents smiled down at them. Angie seated the new family and took their drink orders. Porter went behind the stage to make sure that the animatronics and sound systems were in good working order. On the other side of the curtain, he could hear children talking and laughing, the games in the arcade beeping and blipping. He wasn't sure what had caused the change, but whatever it was, Pizza Playground had started to feel like what it was supposed to be. A place for families to have fun, a place where the employees helped create an atmosphere of entertainment and even enjoy themselves in the process. But how could the place have felt so bad yesterday and feel the opposite today? How could Jack have fired the whole staff yesterday, then rehired them and showered them with kind words and a raise today? It didn't make any sense. Porter remembered something his mom used to say. "When good luck happens, don't question it." It was sound advice. He programmed the show to start. He stepped backstage so he wouldn't be seen by the audience. The canned music started to play, and the sparkling red curtain parted to reveal the 2 patched together, barely moving animatronic figures, the bear and the weird bird thing, that now made up the house band. Even with just 2 performers on the stage, the kids in the audience screamed like rabid fans at a music festival. Porter chuckled. It was nice that they were enjoying the fruits of his labor. Later tonight, he thought, I should tinker around some more with the puppet carver and see if I can figure out what went wrong. Maybe if I can get it fixed, and if Jack's still in a good mood, he'll be willing to watch another demonstration. A successful one this time. The $10 special had been a success. Families had trickled in over the course of the night to take advantage of the cheap dinner offer, and business, though not booming, had been steady. Jack felt encouraged. No, he felt more than encouraged. He felt great. Tonight, as he looked around the restaurant, he saw not a doomed money pit, but a place full of possibilities. He just had to think harder about ways to bring people in. And tonight had been evidence that when he put his brain to use and tried something new, his efforts would be rewarded. Making the place a success was a challenge, but it was a challenge he could rise to. One reason he could rise to the challenge was because of his great employees, but in order to ensure their loyalty, he had to let them know that he appreciated them. Porter and Angie were wiping down the tables in the dining area, and Sage was mopping the floor. They were all such hard workers. He knew Edwin was working equally hard cleaning up the kitchen. Once the money was rolling in better, Jack thought, he should hire a dishwasher to help Edwin out in the kitchen. When business was booming, and Jack felt sure that it would be soon, one guy in the kitchen wouldn't be enough. "Hey, are you guys doing anything special after you guys get out of here?" Jack asked. Angie looked at Porter and Sage, who shrugged. "Just studying, probably." "Well, if you guys can stick around for a little bit after closing, I thought I might order some Chinese takeout. My treat. No need to study on an empty stomach, right?" Angie smiled worryingly. "Sure, thanks. Sure, Jack. Thanks." It was strange when Jack was kind to them. They seemed suspicious, like they didn't trust him, like there had to be a catch. Well, he was going to have to work harder to earn their trust. Jack sat crowded around a table with Porter, Sage, Angie, and Edwin. They passed around little white boxes containing rice, lo mein, Mongolian beef, and moo goo gai pan. Sorry if I don't pronounce that right. This was really nice of you, Jack, Angie said, messily picking up some noodles with her chopsticks. "It sure beats leftover pizza," Edwin added. "That's the truth," Porter said. "No offense to your pizza cooking skills, Edwin." Edwin smiled. "None taken. I probably get sicker of it than the rest of you since I'm cooking it and eating it." "You've been really nice all day today, Sage said. He looked at Jack with a strange intensity. "It's like you're a new man." Jack smiled, happy to be at a table full of happy people sharing good food. It felt like a holiday, a celebration. It was the way things should be. He wasn't sure why things felt so different, so much better, but they did. Jack really was a new man. From the Puppet Carver, by Sage Brantley. Sylvester held his newborn daughter in his arms. With one hand, he touched her impossibly soft cheeks. His eyes filled with tears at the same time his lips spread into a smile. This, he thought, this was what it meant to be human. The end. Sage couldn't believe it. The novel was finished. As he walked backstage to the storage room, he read and reread the novel's last line, smiling to himself. Sage would never admit it to anyone, but he was so moved by the beauty of his novel that there were tears in his eyes. It had taken him so many long nights of writing and rewriting, of sacrificing sleep and time with friends. Finally, he was completely satisfied with his work and hoped that soon a publisher would be too. And then it would be goodbye Pizza Playground and hello bestsellers list. He laughed out loud. He knew he was being ridiculously optimistic. But why not? It could happen. He just needed to do a favor for a friend, and then he could go home to celebrate. Sage pulled back the glittery purple curtain. There it was, the Puppet Carver, named in honor of his novel. Porter had told Sage he was going to have to go back to the drawing board and develop what would hopefully be a more effective Puppet Carver 2.0. The old machine would have to be scrapped, but Porter said he didn't have the heart to do it himself. Sage had promised that he would take care of it. Sage wrestled with the machine, trying to figure out the best way to get it outside to the dumpster. As he tugged on it, he became aware of a slight sloshing sound. And then there was the smell. A rotting, fatigued smell that made him gag. It seemed to be coming from the bottom of the machine. Maybe a rat had crawled in there and died or something. Sage kneeled in front of the puppet carver so he could reach the drawer at the bottom that served as a reservoir for all the waste generated during the carving process. "Here we go," he muttered as he prepared for the source of the smell. When he pulled out the drawer, the smell was so strong that his nose was assaulted. The sight was even worse than the smell. Slimy pink entrails and mangled organs. Was that a kidney or a piece of a liver? Not the organs of a rat, but of a much larger creature. Human size. Sage had no idea what could have happened here, but it was all the more reason to get the whole thing to the dumpster as fast as possible. Holding his breath, he dumped the contents of the drawer in a garbage bag. They landed with a wet splat. He threw the bag in the dumpster and walked away, ready to put his days at the pizza playground behind him.